This is a short story called The Inch That Counted by Lisetta Megerle. I don't know how that's pronounced, but this is the story. Some years ago, as I was journeying through a remote part of Spain, I chanced one day upon an old church. Its quaint and ancient appearance made me curious as to what the interior might be. I passed to the rear and found to my delight an old padre, the caretaker, just ushering in a party of sightseers. Without speaking to anyone, I passed in, the old padre doubtless taking me for one of the party. The church proved to be indeed beautiful. I lingered behind the others as we passed from one interesting object to another, desiring to be alone, and enjoy the peace, quiet, and soothing influence always to be found in an old church. Curiosity being soon satisfied here, the party passed out to explore other parts of the old building, but I remained to enjoy a moment or two longer the beauty and stillness. I was about to follow when I happened to espy in a corner, just a little to the side of the altar, quite a small door. It stood slightly ajar, and wondering to what a door in that place could lead, I went to it and saw at once that it opened into a small closet, about 4 feet square or less. It was perfectly empty with a high ceiling and bare blank walls. What caused me to stop into so uninteresting a place I do not know, but I did so, and instantly, owing probably to my weight on the sill, the door closed with a sharp click, leaving me in perfect darkness. At the same moment I heard the retreating steps and voices of the party with whom I had entered, the swinging to of the outer door and the slide of the heavy bolt into place. If I had been seen, I had been forgotten. I tried to open the door, but all my efforts failed. It was locked and I was a prisoner. My loud knocks and calls failed to bring anyone to my rescue. There I was, locked up in a lonely old church, for how long I could not tell. I was filled with alarm, but soon had reassuring thoughts. Surely the old padre would come at nightfall to attend to the candles, or if not then, in the early morning. At most, my imprisonment could not be over 12 or 14 hours, and having lunched well about 1 o'clock, and it now being about 4, the situation was not alarming, if it was trying. Resigning myself as well as possible to the disagreeable, to pass the time, I proceeded to examine my narrow apartment, by passing my hands carefully over the walls. I hoped to find a spring or something by which the door could be opened, and thus give me the freedom of the church, and relief from this overpowering darkness. I found on reaching up, I could just touch the ceiling with my fingertips. This surprised me, as I had an impression, as I looked into the closet, of a ceiling much higher than it now proved to be, and was still more astonished upon farther examination to find that its surface did not touch the walls, but that there was a space of about 2 inches all around, as if the ceiling were suspended from above. This was stranger than my mistake about its height, and I began to feel somewhat uncomfortable. Seating myself on the floor, I tried to solve the mystery of so curious a construction, but could not think of anything I had ever seen or heard like it. After reflecting some time and being unable to determine upon an explanation, I stood up to examine the ceiling more carefully, and found to my bewilderment that I could easily touch it without fully straightening my arm. Could I be mistaken, or was I the victim of some strange hallucination? Exceedingly puzzled, I sat down and tried to collect my wavering senses. After a time I again stood up and found that my head just touched the ceiling. Surely I was demented, or in a delirium. But after again seating myself for a while and rising a third time, to find that I could now not quite stand upright, I realized the horrible fact that the ceiling was gradually sinking. Even now I tried to persuade myself that I was dreaming, or that the darkness, anxiety, and uncertainty had unsettled my mind and made me imagine strange and unreal things. Summoning all my strength to steady and control my mind, I rose once more to my feet, determined that this trial would settle the question finally. I was bent nearly double. My knees refused to support me, and falling to the floor, I realized it was no delusion, but that the ceiling was slowly, noiselessly, stealthily descending upon me. Would it stop before it reached the floor, or would it come down, down, until it crushed me to atoms on the stones under my feet? My brain and limbs became numb with horror. The cell was not sufficiently large for me to lie flat on the floor, so I sat down with my back to the wall. Occasionally, when my courage and strength permitted, I would raise my hand to find each time that the space above me had become less. All this time I listened eagerly for the footsteps of the old padre, but no sound of human presence reached me. Deathly stillness everywhere. All I could do was to wait, and meet bravely the awful death that I knew was close at hand. Slowly the monster above me descended, until I felt it touch my head, and then sitting upright being no longer possible, I bent over until my forehead rested on my knees. In this painful position I awaited my death. Cold sweat poured from face and hands. I could not move so much as a finger. I felt the electric currents of intense fear stir and stiffen my hair, while I crouched lower and lower, waiting for the awful moment when the thing above me should crush me into eternity. My blood was like ice in my veins, my head seemed bursting with fierce throbs of pain, while every nerve, muscle, and fiber in my body tingled with an agony too horrible to describe. At last I felt it, the fatal touch on my back. One last moment of awful torture, and then unconsciousness. I came to myself by hearing a peculiar grinding sound all around me, and gradually remembered all, at the same time realizing that the horror above me was lifted sufficiently for me to move. I raised my hand, and to my joy found space overhead. I staggered to my feet, expecting to encounter the ceiling again, but no. I could stand upright, and on stretching up my hand, found it gone entirely out of reach. At this moment I heard voices mingled with that queer grinding and creaking, and called as loudly as my weakness would allow. Willing hands soon came to my release. Where had I been? At the bottom of the shaft, down which ran the ponderous weights of the old clock in the steeple? The padre and his assistants had come at daybreak to wind up the clock.